What if I told you that the founder of Jehovah's Witnesses believed that God hid biblical prophecy inside the Great Pyramid of Egypt? Not symbolically, not poetically. He believed the measurements of a pagan monument built thousands of years before Christ contained God's timeline for the end of the world. And this wasn't a side hobby. This was foundational. Today we're talking about Charles Taze Russell, the man that Jehovah's Witnesses claim God used to restore true Christianity. Before we dig in, if you can take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, I'd really appreciate it. So, who was Charles Taze Russell?
It was in 1845 that Joseph and Annalisa Russell emigrated from Ireland to Pennsylvania, USA. They would have 5 children, among them Charles Taze.
Born in 1852, Russell wasn't a theologian, he wasn't a historian, and he wasn't trained in any biblical languages. He was a Pennsylvania businessman who was raised Presbyterian and lost faith in traditional Christianity as a teenager.
Now remember, at this point, Russell is not an atheist, but he's just discouraged. He doesn't feel that truth can be found anywhere. And that sermon by a second Adventist was enough to get him to get his well-worn Bible off the shelf and to start digging again.
So instead of submitting himself to the historic Christian tradition, Russell did something very modern. He decided that everyone else had been wrong for 1800 years. Russell became convinced that the early church fell into apostasy almost immediately, and that all Christian creeds were corrupt, and that God had waited until the 1800s to restore true Christianity.
Real Bible study is only beginning. Heretofore, our reading and studies were hindered by our creed. Now, nobody would think of defending any of the creeds. But as our faith in human creeds dies, our trust in the Bible as divine increases because we understand it better. There was no Bible study for 1400 years. No wonder the faith once delivered to the saints was lost. Now we are returning to the Bible.
That alone should raise eyebrows. But here's what really matters. Russell didn't just reject Christianity. He rebuilt it from scratch, using ideas borrowed from Adventists, failed end-time predictions, and his own interpretations. At the center of it all wasn't Scripture or the early church, it was Russell himself. Russell didn't openly declare that he was God's prophet, but he saw himself as a divinely appointed mouthpiece or ambassador for God. He believed that he personally fulfilled Jesus' words in Matthew 24 about the faithful and wise servant. In other words, Russell believed that God had chosen him to dispense spiritual food at the proper time to the entire Christian world. That belief shaped everything. Because once you believe that God is uniquely guiding you, you can't be corrected by anyone. And any criticism you receive is seen as persecution. One of Russell's most distinct beliefs, as revealed in his book, The Divine Plan of the Ages, was that the Great Pyramid of Giza was God's stone witness and prophet. He taught that the pyramid was designed under divine guidance, and that its internal passageways had encoded biblical prophecies within them. For example, he believed that the pyramid's downward passage symbolized the course of sin, the Grand Gallery symbolized the Gospel Age, and that its upper step symbolized the approaching period of tribulation and anarchy.
It's a little crazy.
Russell also believed that its measurements confirmed his end times chronology. According to Russell, 1 inch of the pyramid equaled 1 year of history. He then used pyramid passage lengths to predict events like Christ's invisible return in 1874, the resurrection of the saints in 1878, and the end of the age in 1914. This wasn't just speculation. Russell published detailed charts with measurements and diagrams. This was presented as some sort of scientific proof that his theology was correct. Let that sink in. A man claiming to restore Christianity used a pagan Egyptian tomb as his prophetic key. And the pyramid, being God's stone witness, wasn't the only bizarre belief that Russell held. He also taught that Christ returned invisibly in 1874, not with trumpets or any sort of fanfare, but unseen by everyone else, and only detectable through the use of special knowledge, not any external evidence. In many ways, 1874 was to Russell what 1914 is to Jehovah's Witnesses today. Because unlike Jehovah's Witnesses teach now, Russell taught that 1914 would be the end of the world. not a sign of the end or the beginning of troubles as the organization now teaches. Specifically, Russell taught that 1914 would mark the end of human governments, the full establishment of God's kingdom, and the completion of the age. When the world didn't end, the meaning of 1914 was rewritten after his death. Now, if it wasn't already obvious, Russell rejected all Christian creeds. That includes the Nicene Creed, the Apostles' Creed, and the entire faith of the early church. Instead, Russell replaced it all with his own multi-volume interpretation of Scripture called Scripture Studies. And get this, Russell said that Christians would be better off reading his book than the Bible itself. Here's how Russell described it in a Watchtower article from 1910. Not only do we find that people cannot see the divine plan in studying the Bible by itself, but we see also that if anyone lays the Scripture studies aside, even after he has used them, after he has become familiar with them, after he has read them for 10 years, if he then lays them aside and ignores them and goes to the Bible alone, though he has understood his Bible for 10 years, our experience shows that within 2 years, he goes into darkness. On the other hand, if he had merely read the Scripture studies with their references and had not read a page of the Bible, as such, he would be in the light at the end of the 2 years, because he would have had the light of the Scriptures. So while the historic Christian creeds and the faith of the early church were corrupt, Russell's books were supposedly required for interpreting the Scriptures. According to Russell, you'd be better off having his writings than the Bible itself.
Wow. Just wow.
That was 1910, and the organization hasn't changed its tune since then. 100 years later, they say, some may feel that they can interpret the Bible on their own. However, Jesus has appointed the faithful slave to be the only channel for dispensing spiritual food. Since 1919, the glorified Jesus Christ has been using that slave to help his followers understand God's own book and heed its directives. They also say that from time to time there have arisen from among the ranks of Jehovah's people those who, like the original Satan, have adopted an independent, fault-finding attitude. They say that it's sufficient to read the Bible exclusively, either alone or in small groups at home. But strangely, through such Bible reading, they have reverted right back to the apostate doctrines that commentaries by Christendom's clergy were teaching 100 years ago. So when people read the Bible, they end up accepting traditional Christian beliefs. It's almost like that's what the Bible actually teaches.
You should read the book.
Charles Taze Russell died in 1916, and on his burial site, a large pyramid monument was erected. A fitting symbol given how central pyramidology had been to his teachings. But eventually, the pyramid doctrine fell out of favor with the organization's new leaders, so it was quietly dropped. No Watchtower article explaining why it was wrong, no apology to followers who trusted it, no acknowledgement that it ever played a central role. Like many other Jehovah's Witness prophecies and beliefs over the years, it simply vanished, just like the monument on Russell's grave in recent years. But none of this is about mocking a man from the 1800s. It's meant to raise a serious question. Why would God choose a man like Charles Taze Russell, who believed and practiced pyramidology, to restore Christianity? The reality is, he wouldn't. And this speaks to the core issue underlying the Jehovah's Witness belief system. Its members are taught to listen to the organization, to listen to the voice of its leadership as if it was the voice of God.
The governing body could be likened to the voice of Jesus.
But if you're going to trust this organization, you should be able to examine its track record, its foundation. That starts with Charles Taze Russell, a man who claimed unique authority, built his predictions and beliefs off pyramidology, and had multiple failed predictions. A man whose teachings were so off base that the organization has quietly abandoned many of them. But the problem isn't just Russell. It's the system that still claims divine guidance today. Yet despite supposedly being guided by God, Jehovah's Witnesses are plagued by an ever-changing doctrine. And the bottom line is that truth doesn't need to be revised. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe and consider sharing it with someone who you think would enjoy it. The goal here isn't to mock Jehovah's Witnesses. It's to help them wake up to the real truth. As always, thanks for watching and God bless.